Hello class. Today we are going to be looking at graphing our trig functions. Specifically, we're going to be looking at graphing sine and cosine. We've done a lot of work on the past, probably chapter and a half, on finding values of different sine and cosines, but now we're going to focus in on how do we graph these functions. So you're going to want to have out your unit circle, or at least have it accessible, because that's going to make your life a lot easier, and then we're not going to have to memorize or use our calculator to find these values. So we're going to first look at the sine function. And both sine and cosine are what are called oscillating functions. And what that means is that they are going to go back and forth. So it's not going to be like a linear function where they're going to continue to go straight, or it's not going to be like a quadratic where it looks like a parabola. They're going to oscillate back and forth. So you're going to see this with any type of motion problem where things go back and forth. So if you can think about a pendulum, how it swings back and forth and it always stays the exact same distance. So we are going to use some key values of the unit circle. So we're going to use negative 2 pi. We're going to use negative 3 pi over 2, negative pi over 2, 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. And the reason we do that, if you look at your unit circle, so 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and then 2 pi again, if we look at our coordinates, they have ones and zeros. And it's really easy to plot ones and zeros. It gets harder to plot these values right here. So for the sine, we're going to go 0, and then it's 1, 0, negative 1, and then back to 0. So as we fill in our table of values, at 0, the sine is 0. At pi over 2, it's 1. At pi, it's 0, and then negative 1, and then back to 0. If we look at our unit circle going the other way, it's the exact same thing, 0, and then negative 1, 0, and 1, and then back to 0. So again, we're just using the coordinates for sine, and remember sine is always our y coordinate. So it's going to be negative 1, 0, 1, and 0 again. So now we can go through and plot these points. So at negative 2 pi, we're at 0. At negative 3 pi over 2, which is right here, we are at 1. So right there. At negative pi, we're at 0. At negative pi over 2, we're at negative 1. And then 0. And then 1. And then 0. And then negative 1. And then 0. So we get this general shape for sine. It's supposed to be a nice smooth curve, but it's hard for me to draw that. And this pattern would continue. So we go go up to 1, go to 0, go to negative 1, go to 0, go to 1, and back to 0. So we get this general shape that looks like this. And again, they should be all connected. So a couple of things to remember or to notice is that for sine, our y-intercept is going to be the 0, 0. And then we're going to go up 1, 0, and that's our general shape. So that's something you want to take note of, and this is what we would call the parent function of the sine graph. So now you can move on to the next video, which we're going to look at cosine.